The beginning of the year is a strange thing, isn't it? It's very strange. Not one of us will know what will happen tomorrow. Not one of us knows what will happen next week. Not one of us knows what's going to happen 6 months from now. It's a very strange thing. Things can happen that we completely didn't expect, and often, more often than not, a lot of unexpected things happen. Things unexpected that we would not ever be able to predict. Sometimes it's small and insignificant, but who knew? Sometimes it's life-altering. Big things that happen in our lives. Sometimes we need to make big decisions that at this point in time, I'm not aware that I would need to make such decisions in a couple months' time from now. It's a very uncertain thing, the future. It's an unknown. It's only known to God. It's an unknown to you and I. We have to make big decisions in considering things like families, work, health, relationships. All those things are thrown into the mix of the big uncertainty of a year that lies ahead. It's a completely unknown. And the funny thing is, we can't help but step into it, into this uncertainty, into this unknown. We can't stay where we are now. We have to step into the uncertainty. We have to step into the unknown. For some, it might be better to just press pause and just stay here today, because things are quite good where I am at this point in time. Some want to press the fast forward button, hoping, not certainly knowing, but hoping that things would be better, because it stays in uncertainty. But we can't stay where we are. We have to. Time thrusts us into tomorrow and into the day after and the week after and so on. It's like parachuting, just as an example. It's an uncertain thing for a person who's doing it for the first time. And there's a 5-letter word that all of us need when we step into uncertain things, and it's called trust. So imagine yourself, maybe you've done it before, imagine yourself getting into a plane and you're going to parachute, skydive for the first time. You've never done it, and all of a sudden there's this massive gap between you and the earth, and you don't know what's going to happen. Well, they told you what's going to happen, but you're not sure about what's going to happen. And you have this instructor person that straps you to them. They've got this mechanism thing, parachute they call it, and you're going to jump out of it. And you, in that moment, have nothing else to do but put the 5-letter word, trust, and that this person knows what they're doing, and that this parachute is going to come out when I pull the little stringy thingy. And everything's going to work. And I will cover this distance safely and land and hopefully not sprain my ankle when I get to the bottom. Trust. Trust. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 to 6. And this is what you and I need going into an uncertain year where we don't know what lies ahead. Trust. Proverbs 3, verse 5 to 6. Trust in the Lord. Not in an instructor or a parachute, but trust in the Lord with all your heart. And do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths. Trust. Let me read that again. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. And do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths. And so I'd like to have a look at a couple points based on those two verses. It would help us trust the Lord as we walk into the uncertainty. The person jumping out of the aeroplane sort of knows that they can trust this person, this instructor, because this person has done it before. multiple times. It's like they've been there before. Now, when it comes to the uncertainty of a year ahead, nothing and no one has been there other than God. Nothing and no one knows what will happen tomorrow other than God. And so as we step in, that's why we have to trust in Him and Him alone. And so, point number 1, trust is a matter of the heart. Trust is a matter of the heart. It's something invisible. It's not something you can touch. It's not something you can put in a bottle and save it for a day when you might need it. Oh, no, I need a little bit of trust, and just go. No, it's something. Trust can be explained as putting confidence in something or someone. I trust that person, or I trust that thing. I put my confidence in that person or that thing. It is something that overflows from the heart. I can't touch it. I can't put it in my pocket. David writes in Psalm 20 verse 7, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. And so in the context here, David is saying, maybe referring to other nations that would attack them and come with horses and chariots. And Israel would also have their own horses and chariots and swords and shields and armor and all those things. But the difference is, he says, the nations that come against them, they look at what they have, they look at their armor, they look at the amount of horses and the strength and the health of their horses and the chariots and all those things, and they think, we're going to conquer these guys because look at the mighty power that we have in our armor, our weaponry, our horses, our chariots. David says, we also have horses and chariots, we also have swords and armor, but our hope, our trust is not in those things. Our trust, even though I have the same things as they have, this invisible thing that I possess, I don't put it in these things that will perish and the horse that will die, but I put my trust in the eternal, the Almighty God. I put my trust in Him. David says here that though we have chariots, we don't put our trust in the chariots. If you think of the David and Goliath example, I think most of us would know the story. David ended up having to choose between Saul's armor and sword and King Saul's shield. And, well, it seems like it. You can reason from a worldly perspective. When it comes to weaponry, David had a choice between that and his slingshot. And so from a worldly perspective, you would reason that David was wise to choose his slingshot, to put his trust in his slingshot, because Saul's armor was too heavy. He wouldn't be fleet-footed enough in order to escape or run from or sidestep this massive, slow giant. And he's not a swordsman. He's not trained in fighting with a sword. And so why choose heavy armor, big shield, a sword that I don't know how to use, when I can use my slingshot? This thing that I've practiced with every day, I've acquired a skill in this thing. I will rather put my trust in the slingshot. But that's not the story, is it? David didn't put his trust in the sword and the shield, did not put his trust because he thought his slingshot was better. No, he knew both of them were terrible, actually. What are my chances? What are my odds if I use a sword and shield and armor or a slingshot? Actually, I have to only put my trust in God. And so he comes to Goliath and says, you come to me with your sword and shield. The things you put trust in. You put trust in your size. You put trust in your strength. You put trust in your previous victories. You've never lost against anyone. You put trust in that. But I put my trust in the Lord my God. How dare you defy the armies of the living God? I put my trust in Him. And it's because of His name and the power that's in His name and it is His might that you will fall today. David didn't trust his skill. But God used what David had become accustomed to, the skill that David had acquired over the years. God used it. But David's trust wasn't in that. And so for us, practically, we often have, we have things, and things we can choose. It's fine to have them. It's not wrong. Like money. It's not wrong to have money. But do I choose to put my trust in money? Or do I choose to put with my heart, my trust in God? That He is my provider. He is the one that cares for me. He is my Father in heaven. And I need not to be anxious about anything when it comes to food or clothing, where I'm going to live and where I'm going to stay. But God, my Heavenly Father, because He loves me, I trust Him and I seek first His kingdom, Matthew 6. And all those things will be added. It's a matter of trust. Many, many, many years ago, as a part of the bank that I bank with, there was a reward system. That if you specifically, one of the things, if you fill up with fuel at a certain fuel station, you would bump up your rewards level, first and foremost. And then secondly, every time you fill up with fuel, you would earn points. And at the end of every month, I'd get like a kickback. And some months, though, that kickback was quite helpful. It was, I'm honest. But it came to the point where I was so strict about my rewards levels and needing to fuel up at the right petrol station, because if I fill up within a 6-month period at another fuel station, they kick me down my rewards levels and I wouldn't earn as much. I would sometimes drive past all the other fueling stations, praying, trusting God that I still have enough fuel to get there so I can fill up. Hey, does it make sense? To one day where Sonia filled up, because the car was close to empty, and she pulled into the closest one and filled up there, and it made me angry. Do you realize what this is going to do to our rewards levels? You know, it's going to bump us down now for 6 months, etc. And I went off, and I got the conviction from God. Says, you've put your trust in a system of this world, to the degree now that you're bickering with your wife about this thing. Why do you trust in such earthly things? Put your hope in me. Put your trust in me. Have I ever let you down? But my trust, and those things are there, and I still earn points now. And God uses that as a channel of His provision. But I don't put my trust in that thing. Every now and again, I on purpose just go fuel up at another fueling station just to tell my heart who you trust in, heart. You don't trust in the systems of this world. You trust in God. You trust in God. It's a hard thing. Point number 2, the wisdom of trusting in God. Solomon writes there, lean not on your own understanding. What he is saying is to trust in God is wise. It is wisdom to put your trust in God. It is foolish to not. You are a wise man. You are a wise woman if you put your trust in God. You are foolish if you put your trust in the systems in man. And you must please remember, it is always as opposed to. I put my trust in this as opposed to putting my trust in God. That is foolishness. In the eyes of God, kingdom perspective, heaven perspective, that's foolishness. But to trust God in spite of my circumstances, in spite of what the world and the economy tells me, or what safety tells me, or whatever, that is wisdom. The world might come, and your accountant might come, your mate down the road who doesn't know Jesus might come and say, you're being foolish. I said, no, I trust in the Lord. That's wisdom. That's wisdom. I think of Gideon. You know, God calls him strong and mighty warrior, go take on the Midianites, the Amalekites. He rallies up 32,000 men. Incredible. They go and fight the Amalekites, knowing that the Amalekites and the Midianites had this combined army of 135,000 swordsmen. It says their camels were too much to count, like the sand on the seashore. It looked like a swarm of locusts, the Bible describes it. So that already, 32,000 against 135,000 swordsmen only. I guess there were a couple of wives and maybe a couple of grannies or someone saying, are you guys sure? I don't know if it's the wisest thing that you're doing. Yeah, well, God has called us, we're going. And so they go. Then God comes and he does the figures from heaven's perspective and thinks 32,000 is still too much. Tell the guys, those who are afraid, they need to go home. Gideon probably hoping, maybe 200, 300, 1,000 max. 22,000 guys pack up their things and go home. And most probably 22,000 comments saying, Gideon, you're stupid. Gideon, what are you thinking? Gideon, you are a fool. But Gideon had heard God. And Gideon had put his trust in God. Yes, he put out his fleece twice. Make sure, is God in this or not? And God confirmed he's in it. But Gideon didn't turn back and say, I don't put my hope in this. And so 10,000 guys, and Gideon's like, God, I'm a fool to do this, but I'm a fool for you. I'll trust you. God says 10,000 is still too much. There's some water down at the brook. Let the guys drink. I want to sift in a little bit further. Ends up with 300 guys. 300. And I imagine these 300 guys, it says they kept all the loot, not the loot, all the food and all the armor and the swords of all the other guys who'd left. They're like, oh, we're only 300. We're going to need as much as we can, Leave the shields, a sword in each hand. At least there were 600 swords, 300 of us, 600 swords. And God comes and says, no, with lanterns or fire, call it a lantern, and clay pots. This is how you're going to do it. Long story short, what seemed foolish to man, very foolish, what seemed idiotic to man, was wisdom because Gideon trusted God. Gideon heard God, and Gideon obeyed God, and Gideon had put his trust in God, and they defeated the Amalekites and the Midianites. To trust God is wisdom. Afterwards, the 22,000 and the 10,000 came back and said, you're a wise guy. That was so clever of you to listen to God. So, yeah, but you guys, when I need it. No. So, hindsight. Trust God. Trust God. When it comes to, I know the big thing, one of the big things we always face is one of the biggest wrestles that all of us have on a daily basis is finances. And when it comes to worldly wisdom and godly wisdom, it won't always line up. It won't. Sometimes I would have, this is not a testimony, just as an example, I have my last $50 left and I walk down the street and God says, give that $50 to that person. And I don't know them from a bar of soap or whatever, and it doesn't make sense because I need to buy my last meal with this 50 rand. Again, it's not a testimony of what happened. But the wisdom of this world would say, keep it, man. Buy something, sell something so you can make a little profit on that. You cannot just have one meal, maybe two meals. But the wisdom of God is, I sow generously because the seed given to me is not just for my consumption. It is seed to be sown as well that will produce a harvest. 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. Tithing. Tithing doesn't work on a budget. It doesn't fit in. If you look at all your expenses, everything that needs to be paid, and 10% of that needs to come to the storehouse, Malachi 3, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up the world. Your accountant, your friend would tell you, you're stupid. You can't pay your school fees. You can't save up for your old day. You can't do this or that because of that 10%. But just keep it. Push it in there. Heaven's perspective is, do I rather put my trust in 10% or do I put my trust in God Almighty? That's wisdom. I mean, literally, it makes sense. The eternal God who is above everything, who has everything, to whom all things belong, I would rather put my trust in Him than put my trust in 10% of my gross salary. It's a heart matter. It's not sums. It's not, God doesn't care about whether it's $50 or 5,000 rand. He looks at the heart and says, my son, my daughter, they trust me. That tithe is an act of faith, guys. It's an act of trust, guys. It doesn't make sense, but I say, God, I trust you. Therefore, the very first thing I do when my salary comes in, I give that 10%. Because I trust you. I don't know what's coming in this month, but I trust you, God. I trust you. It's wisdom. It's wise. Not in the sense of this world. Point number 3. Why we don't trust in God. I'd like to have a look at a couple things. And why we often don't trust in God. And there are more things. I just don't have time for all the things. We don't trust Him because we don't trust Him enough. What do you mean, Rudolph? I mean, if we would trust Him more regularly, we would see Him break through more regularly, and we would have testimonies that would point us back to say, He's come through in the past, therefore we can trust Him again. But it's this cycle of not trusting Him, which just results in not trusting Him, because I've got no backlog, no memory, no history of all the breakthroughs that God has come. I've always trusted in myself. I've always trusted in my plans, my ways, my timing, my strength, my ability. And so to trust in this God that Rudolph speaks about on a Sunday morning, hey, I don't know. Trust is always a decision, but the decision comes easier if you have a history of, and Sonia and I, this is not just finances, any area of our lives. I mean, as a parent, you wrestle through things with your children and what they face at school and as they grow up and all those things. And as we need to sit down together, Sonia and I, often we have to say, but has He not come through before so many times? So therefore we will trust Him again. We will trust Him again. But we struggle to trust because we don't trust. The more you trust, the more you'll be able to trust. Your trust in God will grow. As you just take opportunities to step out on the water, to go out in faith. That God, I don't know, this is an uncertain thing, but I trust in you. You learn to trust. And so we don't trust Him because we don't trust Him enough. Secondly, we lack trust because we don't acknowledge Him. We're unaware of Him. We live our lives like Sunday to Sunday, maybe early morning I have my quiet time quickly. Life is a rush. Life is a rush. It is. I know. It's not the time to talk about that now. But then I run into the rest of my day and I live my life like I'm unaware of Him. I don't acknowledge Him. It says there in Proverbs 3 verse 6, acknowledge Him in all your ways. It doesn't mean that when you're at a business meeting you open it up in prayer. That means you're acknowledging God. Actually, no, it's living in the awareness. To acknowledge someone is acknowledging their presence and interacting with their presence and being aware that they are here. If there would be someone important in this room today, and I would be aware of it, let's say, well, often you would have seen if there's someone who is an NCMI partnering church and they lead a church somewhere else in another nation, we know that they're here, we would acknowledge them. Since we want to honor these guys, let's just welcome them with a clap. It's me becoming aware of their presence and acknowledging their presence that they are here. And so acknowledge Him in all your ways. Listen to how the Message translation puts it. Trust God from the bottom of your heart. Don't try to figure out everything on your own. Listen for God's voice in everything you do, everywhere you go. He's the one who will keep you on track. And so it's an awareness of His voice. It's acknowledging that in every day, my God is with me. And in all my circumstances, situations, I can put my trust in Him. I can lean on Him because He is with me. It's acknowledge. We just live our lives as if He's not there. And I generalize, so I don't Please don't feel like it's a personal attack. How dare you say, Rudolph, I don't acknowledge God. I'm not saying, it's just a general thing in society I've picked up. If we put it the other way, where there is a lack of awareness of Him, we tend to lean on something or someone else instead of leaning on Him. When there is an awareness of Him, and we acknowledge Him, our tendency to lean on Him, to trust in Him in our daily lives is higher, is more than when we live in a lack of acknowledgement, a lack of awareness. Then we tend to lean on other things. We tend to trust in other people other than Him. It says there, the Message translation, in everything, everywhere you go. It's not just, okay, I have a 20-minute business meeting with God. I have these decisions to make. God, help me, lead me, guide me. I trust you. And then tomorrow again, you have this business meeting. No, it's being with Him, knowing Him because you love Him and because you are loved by Him. It's acknowledging the fact that I'm in a relationship with Him and pressing in to have more of Him just for the sake of having more of Him. And when I know Him more, and when I'm more aware of Him, this leaning on Him just comes more intuitively. This trusting in Him. It's not okay, now it's family decisions need to be made. God, come into the conversation, we trust you. Business decisions need to be made. God, come into the conversation, we trust you. No, it's a daily communing. And when uncertain times come and we need to trust, we know that He's right there and we can trust Him. We don't trust Him next because we have pride in our hearts. And this might be a bitter pill to swallow, and I'm not pointing fingers out there, I'm pointing fingers in here. You know, Jesus said, what the heart is full of, the mouth overflows with. Often you see pride and arrogance in people's lives and the way they talk and the way they act. It means the heart is full of arrogance. It's flowing over. It becomes evident in their lives. But I felt the Lord once say to me, just because it's not evident doesn't mean that it's not present. It might not be overflowing. But like the Message translation says, from the bottom of your hearts. Trust the Lord in the bottom of your hearts. Maybe right there down in the bottom, 10%, there is still some pride present there. And often we don't trust Him because we think we can do it. We rely on our own hands instead of relying on the hand of God. When it comes to provision, when it comes to husbands or heads of homes, single parents that need to provide, often we hear this thing that I'm the sole provider for our family. I need to work hard. And we look at our week and we try and work in overtime and extra hours because I'm the one who needs to make things happen. But the Father, now hear me, is the Father and His love saying over you, is like He's not saying sit at home and do nothing. He says, do what you do, but trust with me from the bottom of your heart. Let go of the pride thinking, I can do this. I have had so much success. Or this big deal, this multi-million rand contract that you have waiting. You've signed so many of them and you've brought them through. You've negotiated so many big business deals because you are so gifted. God says, let go of your hands. Trust in me. Do not let your pride and arrogance determine what comes in and what goes out. So we don't trust Him because we trust our hands more than we do His hand. If pride is present in your heart, like it is in my heart, it's there. It's there. Let's turn to the Lord today and acknowledge the pride and open up our hands and take hold of His hand of provision for us. Fourth and last point, trust in God's plans, ways, and timing. Jeremiah chapter 29, there's a familiar verse 11, that we often quote, I know the plans I have for you. declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, to give you a future, a hope. We're going to read it now. Just so that we understand the context there. Israel, because of their generational upon generation disobedience and rebellion and idolatry and turning their hearts away from God, God warned them through His prophets, warned them that He would send them into exile. And they kept disobeying, kept worshiping other gods. And this resulted in God using Babylon as an instrument and taking Judah into exile. Now this is a letter that God writes to them through the prophet Jeremiah in the state of exile. They're in Babylon. And prior to verse 8 that we're going to start reading here, God says, settle there, pray for the prosperity of the city, marry, have children, etc. And then in verse 8, He says, yes, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel says. Do not let the prophets or diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. They are prophesying lies to you in my name. I have not sent them, declares the Lord. This is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. Speaking of Jerusalem. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have banished you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into. Here we see that God has plans. And in His incredible love and His incredible grace, Israel, the last thing that they really deserve is for God to restore them back again. But in God's incredible, unfailing, enduring love, His grace and mercy, He says, you've rebelled, I've punished you, but I'm going to restore you again. And He reveals portions of the plan. And He reveals even the timing is revealed there, 70 years. He reveals portions of the way in which it will take place. If you want the detail of the way, the timing, please go read Ezra and Nehemiah. It's all the detail around how Israel came back out of exile, back to Israel. But it's interesting there in verses 8 and 9 where it says about the prophets, do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. So here was Israel in Babylon, and they had an idea of the timing. They had an idea of the way. They had an idea of how God is going to do it, what the plans of God are. And they wanted their way, their timing, their plans to be fulfilled. They started manipulating these guys, calling themselves prophets. Telling them sort of like, are you sure you didn't dream this? I'm sure that's the dream you had. That's maybe the interpretation. This is what or whatever it could have looked like. But here we see that instead of trusting, God says, do not listen to those guys. The ways in which you should trust are not your ways or the ways of man. Trust in the ways of God. The timing that you should trust in is not the timing of man or your own timing. Trust in the timing of God. They might say, 70 years, God. I won't be here anymore. 70 years. Trust in the timing of God. Trust in the timing of God. Trust in His plans. Because to be a part of His plans, His ways, His timing makes us a part of something far bigger than our own lives, our own kingdoms, our own timeline. If you think of Joseph's life, as an example of this, I mean, everything went wrong for him. Sold into slavery, Potiphar's house, etc. And by the time he was governor, and after the 7 years of plenty, 2 years into the famine, his brothers come at last. And the dreams are fulfilled and they bow down before him. 21 years have passed. But we see a man who's come to realize that God's plans are far bigger than mine. God's ways is far bigger than mine. God's timing for things are far bigger than mine. And he says, you guys in Genesis 50 verse 20, he says, as for you, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. To bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. As Joseph was God's instrument to implement God's saving plan to save up in the years of plenty so that people would have food in the years of famine. It says, I look back now and all the hurt, all the things, and I was probably crying out to God, why? But I trust you, God. But I trust you, oh God. Now I look back, your ways, your plans, your intentions was evil, but God had planned it for good, so that thousands upon thousands, probably millions of people would not die out of hunger because God had raised me up. And I have become part of such a far bigger plan than just me, comfortable, the favorite son in my dad's house with my beautiful colored robe. But because I've trusted in God now, because of hindsight, and unfortunately hindsight you only receive when you get there. Because of hindsight, Joseph was able to say, now I see God's timing is perfect. Now I see God's ways are perfect. He took what you'd intended for evil, Romans 8 verse 28. What is it? What does Romans 8:28 say? It says, God can work all things for the good of those who love Him and who are called according to His purposes. And so we see this manifest in Joseph's life. It wasn't God's intention that he would be sold into slavery, that he would be in jail, in prison, and all those things. It's because of the evil environment, intention of people's hearts. But God used it for the good. So that Joseph ended up being in a far bigger plan. One little puzzle piece. I don't know about you, but in moments like this, I prefer to say, and it's not always easy to make this decision, that God, rather your plans than mine. God, rather your timing than mine. God, rather your ways than my ways. And I'm sure over the 21 years, Joseph came and asked and maybe wrestled with God. But he had no other option. He had no one left. Only God. I will trust you. I will trust you.